Welcome one, welcome all. I'm Matt Kimball. I'm the current president of LAI Baltimore chapter. I'm delighted to have you all on this Zoom call. I think we have somewhere around 51 or 52 folks signed up today. Delighted to see a number of people zooming in today from other chapters, ranging from the GW chapter down in DC to Memphis and New York and Boston and San Diego and Chicago. So that is one of the wonderful upsides of doing these Zoom calls. And we're delighted to have you with us today for what I think will be a very interesting program. Nate's going to tell us what's up next month, but I did want to give you this early save the date for July 22. We're going to do our traditional summer outing, and guess what? We're actually going to do it together in person, live. It's going to be in a pavilion in a park next month. As Nate will tell you, we're going to have folks from the Baltimore Greenway Trails talk to us about that effort, and we thought it'd be a nice follow-on to do our summer outing on one of those trails. Details to follow, film at 11. But for the moment, at least, we have a July 22 date. And Nicole, I need to catch up with you so we can put that on the website.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so just stay tuned and we will follow up with details on that. But that'll be our first in-person gathering in, since probably March of last year. And so a long, long time. I hope everyone will put that on their calendar and make an effort to come. So Nate, with that, do you want to tell us about what's coming up?
Okay. First of all, I'm going to mute everyone. And so Chip and Michael, please unmute yourselves. Okay. Okay, as Matt said, well, our next presentation is going to be on the Greenway Trail, and we're going to have Jim Brown of Rails to Trails and Jeff Lanou from the Baltimore City Planning Department talking about what's going on with and all the progress they've made with the Greenway Trails, and then that's to be followed up by the following month with a experience live for us on the trail. And that's the presentation will be on Wednesday, June the 16th. But today's event is what's behind the soaring construction cost. All of you, by joining this call, I'm sure are aware that construction costs have been soaring, and we have two of the leading experts in this region on construction cost. We have Chip Lambertson, who lives construction costs, and we have Michael Denise, who is makes his living through the analysis of construction costs, as well as other construction and development items. Michael is a senior advisor for the Strategic Advisory Services Group of Cushman and Wakefield. He's been working with them for quite a number of years, providing construction, consultation, valuation, and transaction services for clients in the industry. Previously, he was an active duty infantry captain for the U.S. Marines. He has a master's in real estate and infrastructure and a master of business administration and finance from Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business. He also has a BA in political science from University of California, San Diego. Chip is vice president of project cost and estimating with Whiting Turner, and but beyond that, I'll let him describe his experience. Chip?
Okay, well, yeah, I've been with Whiting Turner now 23 years. I've been an estimator though for around 37 years. So I got into the business a while back. And, I think I've also taught, I was construction estimating and construction management adjunct professor at CCBC for about 15 years. And so as you said, Nate, I've been kind of living costs for a long time. And this past year has been extremely intense, to put it lightly. And one of the things I do like to describe is a little bit about my approach. So you kind of get the perspective I take when we're in the situations like we have been, especially this past year. So, as being with Whiting Turner, obviously I'm approaching this as a general contractor, a cost analyst, but also as a partner, and to really make sure that whatever I hear and learn, I'm sharing with our clients and the architects and design team and everybody. I also want to make sure, obviously, as an estimator, I'm looking at the cost primarily, not only short term, but long term, and just trying to get a handle on what the impact's going to be. And finally, I am also an internal optimist. So I really try to look for the silver lining when I'm doing this. And this past year has really been a challenge as far as that goes. So, but I do really try to make sure that we're looking for what the positives are and where they might be and how far away they are. So with that, again, I just wanted to kind of describe a little bit about the angle I take when I'm doing this.
Okay, good. Well, the way we're going to do things this time is I'm going to ask a series of questions to the various panelists. And I know that Michael has various slides that he will be presenting, but both of our panelists will be answering the questions. Anyone there, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then when we get done with the questions that we have that I'll be asking, we'll get to your questions, and if there's something that dovetails with my questions, we'll include those as we go along. But the first question is, how much have construction costs moved in recent months? Chip, do you want to start that one?
Sure. AGC just released a report a couple of months ago, and they showed that material costs alone in the past year have gone up between 12 and 13%. So if someone locked in a bid last March or a year ago in 2020, and then didn't purchase the materials until this March, they were paying 12 to 13% more total. Obviously, some of the materials are a lot more than that. We've seen, just in the first quarter, steel go up between 35 and 40%, asphalt 40%, diesel 36%. So materials, especially really since October, have taken off. So we're trying to balance what the real costs are, and that's kind of like those numbers that we're seeing and we're hearing about, to what we're getting from bids and some of the trade partners are coming in with from when they're bidding on work. So there's a little bit of a balance there, and a lot of questions right now. So I know, Michael, you've got some charts and some more information you want to dive in a little deeper.
Yeah, and I think Chip, you really spoke well to it, but there are definitely differences from region to market and nationally, and I think kind of putting a visual on this really helps with that. If you were to go off of the an index where 1982 is kind of your baseline, over the past year, seeing overall construction spending is definitely dramatically increased, and as Chip mentioned, it's specific mainly to certain materials, but most materials have gone up significantly, and kind of support that. So we kind of break down the construction materials here. This is overall materials, and something I think it's important to point out is that in the last recession, which was also a construction related or real estate related recession, you did see a dramatic spike in overall construction pricing. However, that pales in comparison to what we're seeing now. And let's just break this down. So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see lumber pricing. To the right of that, gypsum pricing or pricing related to drywall. Below that is iron and steel, and to the left of that is cement and concrete. And all of these going up, but you can see there's dramatic variation in that. And there are different reasons behind this, but I think one of the most popular and well-known changes right now is lumber. And these prices represent nearly a doubling in lumber prices across the nation over the past year. And a lot of people weren't expecting this. And it seems that it's affecting most regions and in just about every single type of asset class, whether it's residential, industrial. Everybody is kind of feeling the pain, specifically when it comes to lumber, but obviously other materials have drastically increased as well. So, and then kind of the last of these, and again, this points to continued increases, but with less dramatic increases in sand, gravel, crushed stone, paint, and other types of coating like that, have only seen a recent increase, and same thing with foam products. And we're going to get into I guess the reasons behind this maybe a little bit later, but it's something important to point out that foam and paint and rubber products are a much more recent increase versus lumber and others that they started increasing dramatically in the middle of 2020. So,
Okay.
And then I was just going to say there's one place where it's been significantly less affected, which would be the rental and leasing of construction and heavy machinery for construction. So.
Okay. And Michael, how has these movements affected the various types of construction differentially, the home construction, commercial, and industrial?
Yeah, so it is definitely affected all of them, but most dramatically residential and multifamily construction. And these two graphs kind of point that out, where you see, a near 30 to 40% increase in the costs in building materials for those two product types. And I think part of why you'll see the difference between this and industrial and versus office, where you've just recently seen the spikes in those, is that there's been a lot more demand for housing, and demand for housing has really pushed construction prices, specifically in those two industries, in multifamily and residential, and towards that goes back to the middle of 2020. There was a lull in the first couple of months in demand for housing and for multifamily, and the multifamily lull in demand even kind of expanded towards the end of 2020. But residential has been strong, and a lot of that comes from saved money from individuals having larger nest eggs so they can purchase a home. We're more likely to purchase a home now than they were before. But primarily, and this kind of goes back to a little bit what I do, we sell a lot of land to home builders and developers, and home builders and developers are willing to pay just about anything for any piece of land right now if they can build on it. And it does depend on the area. Certain areas are more popular than others. Urban is less popular right now than suburban, obviously. But essentially, if you own it, they will buy it and they will build it. And when it comes to home construction, and when it comes to office, when it comes to retail, when it comes to hotel, that is very much a different scenario. I think most people know that retail took a huge hit, as did hotel, over the pandemic, and hotel is starting to claw its way out faster than retail is, although it really depends when you go to retail what type of asset that you're looking at. Class A assets in strong suburban markets that have a lot of disposable income are doing much better than those that are kind of on the verge or in lower income neighborhoods or in dense urban, but not, let's say for Baltimore, for example, if they're not waterfront, they're struggling a little bit more if they're in that dense urban environment. So industrial doing very, very well, a lot of strong demand for industrial. And that's kind of, you've seen a shift there. It hasn't completely made up for the retail, the lack of retail demand. But the industrial demand is booming very, very strong. Baltimore is one of those strong markets where it's definitely seen a huge plus on that. Amazon has signed a lot of new leases within the past few months, and it seems to be like Trade Point Atlantic and other parts of Baltimore, on the Baltimore County in particular, are doing very, very well, specifically along the I-95 corridor. And that's really kind of keeping and pushing the industrial pricing up higher. So that's where we're seeing it there. So I guess we'll get into the affordability in a second. But.
Okay. Chip, you have anything to add at this point?
Well, just kind of going back to, how much have prices moved. It really is, this isn't a good answer, but it's really all over the place. And again, another survey by AGC showed that there hasn't, even with these big material price increases, there hasn't been a huge increase in final bid costs. And they're reporting that a lot of contractors are absorbing the cost themselves. And I don't know how much of that is really happening. I think there is some of it, and that can only last so long. We did a study that really kind of broke the numbers down. We took the percentages of material increases and how that should impact the final cost. If you just do the math and you don't think of anything else outside of that. And even with those big increases, we were seeing anywhere between 3 and 6% total of what should be the final impact. If you take the material cost, that's percentage of the total cost, and break it out that way. Then you've got the risk factors. You've got trade partners and subcontractors who are, they're afraid of what's going to happen next, and what's going to happen next week, next month. So numbers are going up a little bit as they're protecting themselves. And then unfortunately you have opportunists, and there are people out there who will take advantage of the situation. They're very, very busy right now, so they can afford to raise their numbers up. I've always said material costs are material costs, labor is labor. When it comes down to it, what's really going to drive things up or down is profit margins. And if margins have to come down, then you'll see escalation come down a little bit. So it's just all over the board right now. And I see some questions coming in about causes and things like that, but we'll get to those in a minute. So so the prices are moving. It all depends on where you are and how busy things are right now.
Okay. Michael, do you want to comment on the absorption by builders versus consumers?
Yeah, I think Chip did a good job of it, but I think one example that I can show is that we are currently selling a couple of pieces of land right now, and we recently had a call for offers on a couple of those properties, and the bids, almost all of them were regional or national builders, and they came back all over the place. It almost seems like the builders have no idea what it's going to cost to build. And so some of them are extremely optimistic and some of them are extremely pessimistic. But the margins for some of them are definitely being pushed thin. So.
Okay. Okay, Michael, do you want to talk about how these increases have affected local markets versus the national scene?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I'm going to use Baltimore as an example, specifically when it comes to housing and residential, because at the top chart I have here shows overall national home price index versus the bottom, which kind of shows the increase um, in Baltimore, and then you can kind of see almost like a heat map to the bottom left here that shows kind of each individual metro and how each metro is being affected. And something that's very important to keep in mind is a lot of the large, dense metro areas, New York, San Francisco, San Jose, Dallas, Fort Worth. There's not a lot of information on that, or at least they're not showing a lot of information on that, versus a lot of the suburban markets around those areas are seeing dramatic increases in pricing for residential. And you can kind of see that for Baltimore as well, because Baltimore qualifies, it's both an urban environment, but it's also a suburban commuter kind of place. If you want to commute one or two nights, or 1 or 2 days a week to Philadelphia, maybe you can still tolerate a commute from White Marsh, northeast Baltimore area. And if you're, going to be commuting to DC, most places that are on the western side of the Beltway or southern part of the Beltway are definitely a manageable commute, even for 4 or 5 days a week. And so Baltimore is not just an urban environment; it's really a commuters type city, second tier city. And so you see dramatic price increases for the price of homes in and around Baltimore, kind of regardless of where it is. You see these prices in Fells Point and Fed Hill, all the way to Pikesville, White Marsh, Towson, and it really doesn't matter where they are. You see some, sharper spikes in certain places, but overall, Baltimore is doing much better than their average market in New York or San Jose, but those places are also increasing. And so it really depends on what people see. New York is not doing great in terms of home pricing, but that's starting to come back now within the past couple of months. So in terms of affordability, this hasn't really affected the affordability for homes yet. And it hasn't really affected, if you go to multifamily, it hasn't really affected the affordability of multifamily either. If you kind of take a look at the top chart and the other two, the right chart and the bottom chart are construction and what's currently under construction. At least when it comes to nationally, there's been a dip in multifamily construction that has been pretty dramatic since the beginning of COVID. As you can see, it dropped from about 700,000 units under construction down to 580,000 units under construction. So there's been definitely a dramatic drop nationally for that. But then if you go over to the chart to the bottom left here, showing the difference between Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, DC is doing a little bit better, and people have kind of ignored the increase in vacancies there to say that there's going to continue to be demand later on, so we're going to absorb the costs and just continue constructing multifamily product there. Whereas Baltimore, it took an initial dip, but it kind of has increased a little bit since then. And it's kind of stable right now at about 80% of what it was just before COVID. So there's still demand there for construction, and it's still happening. But on the national level, you don't see the same that you do on the local level, or at least around Baltimore and DC. So. Did you have anything to add to that, Chip?
Yeah, you touched on it. Yeah, it just seems like the regions that are the busiest or that are really picking up are also seeing, again, you're seeing some prices increases in those areas as well. So, yeah.
Okay, has all this affected the level of development? Or what impact has it had on development?
So I started to cover that with the multifamily, and so I guess I can go into the office and industrial as well. So it's definitely overall nationally, it's affected multifamily construction significantly. But then, when you take a look at office and industrial, the stories are different. Stories are very, very different. You know, everybody wants to build industrial right now, but nobody wants to sell industrial right now. And so, and that's because along with the increased construction, vacancies have also dropped, and rental rates have increased on a per square foot basis for industrial product. And again, I'm comparing the most relevant markets to Baltimore, you know, New York, Philadelphia, and DC. But you see this in most markets as well. People are really holding on their products, and they are trying to build as much industrial as they can, because essentially anybody will buy it. And it's considered to be a very valuable long-term hold right now for most investors. And so they're really, and that's kind of, you know, multifamily is kind of in that same camp, which is why you saw the sales activity drop for that as well. But office sales volume is dropping for a completely different reason. And that's because a lot of people have no idea where that's going to go. You know, even though most of us have started to see opening up within our local economies, and our offices and people coming back to the office, it's still extremely uncertain, and buyers do not like uncertainty whatsoever. And so nobody's going to construct office right now, or nobody's, unless there's already you know, they've already had shovels in the ground. Most people are trying to push that off as much as possible, trying to see where the market is going to go. And until sales volume starts to pick up, I don't think anybody's going, and rental rates stabilize and vacancy decreases. I don't think that construction is probably going to pick up for a little bit. And then here's just kind of what's under construction nationally when it comes to those two markets. As you can see, the dip in office, whereas you see the increase in industrial, just kind of further emphasizing that.
Okay. Now, this next question also is one of our chat questioners also asked, how are labor costs moving?
Well, labor is, again, you're seeing a 2 or 3% increase per year, roughly. With labor, though, it really, if you go back to when things started to pick back up again last summer with construction, the concern was not necessarily labor rates, but productivity. And the thought was, with all the safety protocols on job sites, with everything that needed to be done, how is that going to affect things, and how is it going to affect costs? And there was a time where it was, there was some getting used to that had to happen. Fortunately, that's kind of been worked out, and it's pretty much been smoothed over, and we've come up with ways of getting things done efficiently. And so the overall impact on the project with labor and productivity isn't as bad as a lot of folks thought it might be. But as far as, the other catch with labor is, even before the pandemic was the shortage of skilled labor, and being able to get enough people out to the job sites and enough skilled workers out there. Once the pandemic hit, with various layoffs and things that took place, we haven't been able to get as many people back, just like what happened in the recession in 2008, 2009. A lot of people left, not as many people came back. We hadn't reached peak yet. And then we just got hit again. So that's going to continue to be an issue. And that, will eventually will affect costs as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't really have much to add when it comes to that. I'm very curious to see what's, if the longer, from an economic standpoint, it's the longer we have an increased amount of labor in the labor market, I wonder if that will help suppress labor costs in the long term. So.
Okay. Michael or Chip, I guess for both of you, what are the underlying causes of all these price movements?
You mind if I go first, Michael?
I want to hear what you say first.
Well, the beginning of this, obviously it was pandemic related, and a lot of it was and still is. So you had facilities that shut down last spring. You had lumber mills that shut down. You had steel mills that shut down. A lot of folks were expecting and predicting that sharp V rebound. It came, and that sharp V came fast, and it came quicker than a lot of people were ready for. So there's just been a lot of facilities and manufacturers just trying to catch up, and the demand has gone up a lot faster than many thought it would. And that was kind of the start of it. So that with lumber especially, and then steel. And then with the demand for steel, you mentioned the industrial and what's been going on there, but yes, the manufacturing distribution, these huge distribution centers that are being built around the country are really taking up the joists and decking. Or you have to wait if you have steel joists and deck on a job, you're waiting until next year before you're going to get that material right now. So that's been a big part of why we're seeing these price increases. Then you had this past winter where Texas froze over, and you mentioned foam products and things like that. 85% of resin and their byproducts are manufactured or out of Texas. So those facilities froze up, and now they're trying to catch up. So that means PVC, that's insulation, that's roofing. You think about all the plastic and rubber products that are on a project, countertops, flooring. There's so many things that are impacted. And you don't hear as much about resin and the impact that has had, but that's a big one. And with that, prices have shot up for PVC and all those materials. Throw in the trucking issues that we're now having with truck manufacturing, because the microchip shortages that are put into trucks are slowing down productivity for truck manufacturing. And then trucker shortages, which was an issue before the pandemic, 3 or 4 years ago, started becoming an issue. You don't have enough truck drivers. They're running into the same sort of thing that construction is running into, where not as many young people are getting into it. Older people are retiring. So we've got a shortage there. So that's now impacting delivery costs and delivery times. So between the pandemic, the winter, and then some of the other things that like I said, trucking and other issues, that they've all just kind of piled on. And, we've seen things like this in the past. Back in 2006, 2007, it was steel and everything metal. But now it's so many other things. And that's been the toughest part of this, is just trying to get our arms around all these different materials that have been impacted by these things.
Yeah. And I would only add to that, I've definitely seen, and I would agree with most of those. Additionally, when it comes to lumber costs, I've seen some statements on the beetle situation in British Columbia, how I think roughly 10% of the US lumber comes from British Columbia, Canada. And there's been a decrease of something like 20 to 30% of their lumber output due to an infestation of some sort of beetle variety. I'm not an expert on beetles by any means, but that definitely probably right. There are a lot of different reasons. I think probably from a more macro level, I think I would only add that a lot of people going into the pandemic were sitting on a lot of capital, a lot of dry powder, and were ready to invest in just about anything when they saw the kind of the winds going in the right direction during the pandemic recovery. And I think because of that, a lot of costs are willfully being absorbed. And because of that, if you can push the price, you can push the price. I think people have the money to pay for it in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Are you seeing substitutes for some of these scarce materials? Chip.
One thing that we've been able to see on a few occasions is, and we talked about steel joists being a huge issue right now, and being able to get them. we're seeing some projects switch over to wide flange steel because you can get them quicker. So that's the one substitute that we've been able to, and that can't always be done, but that's one thing that's able to, and that actually can save you a little bit of money too. So if that's an option, something you might want to go with. But again, if you're going from a steel frame to a concrete frame building, that's one option as well. But rebar, wire mesh, all those have gone up a lot. You know, they've basically doubled as well. So you're still going to see some differences in concrete.
Yeah, I've seen, you know, Chip knows much more about this than me, but yeah, I've definitely seen some replacement of more luxury items that have not increased in price versus using traditional lumber to work on, you know, decking, structure walls, things like that. Where people will use composite as opposed to it, because it's, you know, even though it's still a little bit more expensive, it's a much finer, much more luxurious type product or higher end product, and they might as well increase the 5% or 10% in cost and go with that versus when it was, you know, a 30% increase in cost. So.
Chip, how have suppliers been responding to these increases?
Well, you know, one of the things that I've been really active with over the past year is the supply chain and just trying to keep up with it. And we actually have a tracker that we're constantly reaching out and trying to find out what's being impacted. And you know, they're doing their best to keep up, but again, it's just trying to meet the demand, and there's only so much they can do, and it's, again, from between the pandemic and the winter, and you know, the other thing I didn't mention was the switch in policy from coal, and you don't have as many coal-fired energy plants, so a byproduct of that is fly ash. Fly ash goes into a lot of different, concrete additives and gypsum additives and things like that. So that's also affecting things. So they're doing the best they can right now, but again, they're just trying to keep up.
Okay, Michael, what's been the impact of the new stimulus law on construction prices? Has that been a factor of consequence?
Absolutely. I mean, specifically from a macro level, it has really pushed demand for construction and demand for specifically residential construction, because you know, as I kind of mentioned this and went into this earlier, but one of the biggest barriers to entry for the homeownership market before the pandemic was that nobody had a nest egg to put a down payment on a house. And that, coupled with everybody's fear for living in the city, really kind of combined into the perfect storm to push everybody out into the suburbs and buy their own house or more suburban like areas. And so that definitely, the stimulus bills, when it came to direct payments to individuals and PPP money for the smaller construction companies, that definitely increased demand significantly.
Okay, and what do you think the impact of the infrastructure bill, if it passes, would have?
I think it would have a very similar effect. All of this is, you know, inflationary in nature. And I think that, you know, the more money people have to build, the more they're going to build. And that's, I think it's just economics 101.
Okay, so where do both of you see construction costs going in the next year and long term?
Well, first I'll hit on a couple that I promised silver linings, so I'm going to touch on a couple of those because they impact the future. Fortunately, there's several steel mills and fabricators that are expanding and should be up and running by the end of the year. So that's going to help with the supply of that, we're starting to, you know, we're hearing from people out there that there should be some corrections, at least in steel, and also PVC by the fall and by the end of the year. So hopefully some of that will start leveling off. But I think, that said, I think in total, if I'm looking at escalation for this year, I'm up around 5 or 6% total. I think there is going to be some absorption by some, there's going to be some higher numbers from others, but somewhere in the average, we're going to be around that 6%. Moving forward to next year and to the year after that, I would expect things to be a little bit closer to normal, which is that 3 or 4% range. But again, it all depends on when we get to that closer to equilibrium with the supply and the demand. And it's good that we're busy, right? We want to be busy. We just want to be able to do things and on schedule and on budget. So right now, money is easy to get. Lending is a little bit easier to get. So that's picked things up. And like I said, some of these manufacturers hopefully will be caught up and catching up to the demand here within the next half a year or so.
Okay. Michael?
That's a little bit more optimistic than me. I think I hate making predictions because this last year, if it's taught me anything, it tells me that I don't know what the future holds. But I would be very wary of a couple things. One is infrastructure spending by the government. How long, if there's going to be an extension of unemployment benefits, if there's going to be an extension of individual payments, if there's going to be another PPP round. I think all of those will definitely affect demand, but I think another big question mark is what happens with the Fed. The Fed is holding strong right now, and if those interest rates stay low, I think you can continue to see demand. But if they creep up, and if they start to creep up fast, I think there might be a sudden halt to all of this. They could definitely create a surplus of materials if everybody adjusts to construction building the way that they are in right now. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. I would like to think that there will probably be a significant decrease in spending to individuals and small business pockets that will help kind of combat some of the extra money they have sitting around. And that, maybe, as Chip said, there's only a small increase in inflationary levels, maybe 5-6% towards over the next year. But I think it really depends, and I'm thinking it might be a little bit more than that. So I don't want to put exact numbers on it because I'm most likely going to be wrong if I do.
We're probably both going to be wrong. But you're right. I think there are definitely going to be pockets that we're going to see higher, and there might be pockets where we'll see lower, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we get to some of your questions. One of them is, can canceling some of the Trump tariffs help with pricing, particularly lumber? Anyone want to take that? I mean,
I'll throw in my 2 cents, but I think it can help some, but I still think the main cause of what's happening with lumber right now is they're just not able to get it produced fast enough. It used to be you could get lumber, you can get drywall, some of these other materials within a few days. Now you're waiting weeks for it. So I think that's driving costs up as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's probably a small effect from those tariffs, but I don't think it would be big enough to make a huge impact.
Okay. Have material price increases been indexed against transportation costs, cost of fuels, reported shortage of truck drivers, et cetera, then at the mills and on-site skilled and certified equipment operators?
has it been indexed against it? I have not seen something specific to that. I do know that, you know, again, with the cost and with demand of materials that's going on, and then the trucks, they follow what's called a van ratio, where it's so many loads per truck. And right now they're at about 6 loads per truck. And 2 years ago it was 1.5. So they're being stretched with everybody else right now.
Okay. Let's see. Can you differentiate more between new construction and existing price increases, particularly for homes? Is it have the increases affected existing homes to the same level as new homes? And are condos included in this?
So the numbers I provided were specifically for, were for all homes. But that is a good point. New construction homes have definitely increased more than existing structures. And that's primarily because most of the new home builders or home buyers are first-time home buyers. And so you're seeing a huge increase in that. And then, you know, coupled with that demand, you see a lot of people that are trying to upgrade their homes during this time. And so that's, I don't have an exact slide to show the numbers there, but the change is, I think, overall, I think the median price increase in the Baltimore area was something like 10% for all homes, and I think it was higher single digits for existing and closer to 20%, maybe a little bit more for newer home build. And I don't have numbers separating condos versus regular single family. But
okay. Will these shortages, such as the ones in plastic in Texas, lead to these industries relocating or expanding outwards?
I think as far as the manufacturing in Texas, this is my opinion. I don't think they're going to go anywhere. You know, it sounds like what happened down there was a result of some infrastructure issues. And my guess is that with everything that happened down there, and with as tragic as it was, they'll make some big changes that will help improve things a little bit, so that don't have that happen, or it will be a little tougher to happen. You know, that's also a region that gets hit, you know, especially as you get closer to the coast. They typically get a hurricane or two every year, but they still tend to stay down there. So I don't expect them to relocate.
Okay. Have some contractors gotten into real trouble because of hard bids a year ago?
yes. I've seen yes, I've seen some contract. Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by trouble. From the projects that I've seen, they definitely had to rebid and adjust their pricing significantly, doubling the pricing of lumber or whatever the material was. But they usually, in most cases, I've seen the developer continue on with the project regardless.
Yeah, and you know, we're starting to hear more about escalation clauses and things like that, trying to think about incorporating those. But you know, one of the other things that I track is the surety's loss ratio, which is a indicator of subcontractor default. And it, you know, for the past few years, that's usually been around the 14 or 15% range, which basically measures the amount of premiums paid or the amount of claims versus the amount of premiums. And it's usually in that 14 or 15% range. And as a national average, that's closer to 22% now. So that again is kind of an indicator that there are some trade partners and subcontractors that aren't able to make it through this because they're losing in situations like that, or they're absorbing more than they should.
Elaine Warzala, you've asked a few questions. We may have covered them, but can you unmute and see if, let us know if we covered your questions?
Sure, thank you. This has been fascinating, really fascinating. The only one I was still curious about, I think, is the labor. When you were responding to the labor question, you did address the labor like on site, construction labor, literally. But what about labor in terms of creating and manufacturing some of these materials that have increased in pricing? Has that had an impact? Have they had a labor shortage in terms of being able to run the mills or run the factories that are creating these building products?
And that kind of played into part of the reason that this all kind of started. You know, when things did kick back up and facilities were opening back up, they weren't opening back up at full, you know, with full capacity of all their people. And again, it was, you had to space people out. You had all these different things. You couldn't bring them all back at once. Plus some people just weren't coming back. And still haven't. So
Is that it? It's like the hospitality industry, they're still not coming back.
To an extent, and you know, and I've read, I'm not sure how much I buy into it, but I've read where, you know, there's still that thought that you know, when these checks come out and stimulus checks come out and things like that, and they're getting more money for unemployment, so that's keeping people home, and you know, I'm sure there's some of that, but there's also just like they're finding other careers. So
Right. Well, they had to find other jobs because they were let go and needed to find something
Right.
else, and then they did.
right.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Abby Ferretti, did we answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, my question is that we looked at costs in DC for affordable housing in 2020, and we found that the skilled labor, the problem was that the replacement. So it was just that the folks were aging out in those skilled places and they weren't getting their replacement, and that the community college and other training places were not getting the enrollment and the push that they were needing and support. And I haven't seen a national or a local policy change that's really tried to identify and address that. And I know it's a huge concern. So I think you sort of addressed it, but that was really the crux of my question. You know, obviously in DC, the costs are, you know, forced into some other issues as well with the local policies as well. But thanks.
Yeah, and I think what I had heard a while, and this is pre-pandemic, it was for every 5 people that retired from construction, only 1 was coming in. So that's been an issue for a long time, and you know, unfortunately, that it's just something we've been having to deal with. Trade schools are just not getting as many people, and community colleges, and they're trying, but you know. And then with DC, Northern Virginia, it's been so busy the past few years. So the skilled labor that is in that area is being stretched because there was so much going on there, and there is again.
Michael Cordes, did we answer your question?
Sorry.
Unmute yourself, yeah.
I have to admit that I had to take a phone call from a client while my question was being asked, so I didn't hear the answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, you want to present your question again?
Yeah, my question was basically do you perceive that most of these material prices increases are a result of the pandemic and its related supply chain disruptions? And do you expect that that will resolve somewhat over the coming 12 months as supply chains normalize? In other words, is this more of a temporary phenomenon, or do you see this as a more of a permanent pricing structural change?
Well, hopefully it's temporary. It did start with the pandemic, and then what I described was that everything kind of shut down, and then just everything didn't open up as fast as it should have or it could have. The rebound came very quickly, And these manufacturing facilities, lumber mills and so on, were just not ready yet. And it took a while for them to kind of gear up and get going. And they're still catching up. The good news is that there is a lot of expansions right now, especially in steel, where some of these facilities will be adding on and should be online by the end of the year. So that'll help with steel demand, which will help with the pricing. And the same thing with PVC and some of these other resin materials that fell behind because of the winter that hit Texas, that shut down those facilities for so long that's impacted PVC, insulation, roofing, and so many other materials. So the pandemic had a big part of it, but then there's been other things like the winter weather and trucking issues and everything else that have also kind of played a part.
Yeah, and if if the industry builds up to meet current demand, and then demand is pushed down because of increased interest rates, I think you could potentially see a real plateau of pricing. But again, I don't want to predict anything for the future.
Okay, we're coming on to 1 o'clock, but Michael or Chip, do you have any final remarks?
Chip?
Okay. No, I appreciate you inviting me. Hopefully we hit on everything. I think we did. It seems like we hit on a lot. So a lot got covered this hour. And again, thank you for having me, and good luck moving forward. And hopefully some of us will be talking down the road.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing me on, and love the questions, and I love talking about this kind of stuff. So if anybody wants to contact me afterwards, I'm definitely available, and wouldn't mind you sharing my my information.
Okay, yeah, and I think it was an excellent presentation by both of you. We thank you very much for joining us, and thank everyone out there for joining us. We had about 40 or more participants, and so it was a successful event. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you both, Chip and Michael, for your presentation today, and for David, Ben, for helping to set this up. Again, another plug for our June 16 program on the Greenway Trails, and save the date for July 22. I think we can sign off, Nate, unless there's more.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Take care.